I'm Emily McCabe, and this is Fishing Game Changers, brought to you by Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. In this series, I join our staff in the field to learn more about what they do, why they love it, and what drives them to apply their time and talent to the Maine outdoors. Maine has over 6,000 lakes and ponds and 32,000 miles of rivers and streams, offering endless opportunities for Mainers and visitors to enjoy recreating on the water in every part of the state. If you're like me, you've taken advantage of the benefit of having public access to many of these water bodies. But have you ever wondered how these public access areas are acquired, constructed, and maintained? There are over 300 water access sites that are owned by the state, roughly half by Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and the other half by Bureau of Parks and Lands within Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. In addition to the sites owned and maintained for public use by the state of Maine, there is also a large community of sites that are either municipally owned or privately owned, as well as a collection of informal sites that you might find just off the side of the road somewhere. I really wanted to learn more about public access to Maine's waterways, so I headed into the field to meet up with Diano Circo, the chief planner at Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Like many of us, Diano wears a few different hats, but his primary job is to oversee the water access program, which means he's responsible for the department's 174 water access sites that span from the St. John River up north all the way down to Mousom Lake on the New Hampshire border. In simple terms, Diano's job is to help people get access to Maine's waterways, which he likes to call Maine's blue state parks.
So the story I like to tell is that for years I worked on land acquisition conservation projects, and I looked at maps all the time trying to figure out where were the right places to be doing acquisitions to connect those green areas on those maps together. And I didn't always look at the blue areas on the map. And what I realize now in doing what I'm doing is that those blue areas are just as important. I call them the blue parks, the blue state parks, because they're no different than the green areas if you think about it. All great ponds in the state of Maine, every water body over 10 acres or impounded water over 30 are owned by the people of the state and are held in trust to be used for recreation and conservation, just like a state park. So you can imagine if you had a 500-acre state park where only the people who live next to the state park were able to access it and use the hiking trails and biking trails and go to the scenic vistas. But when it comes to lakes, we don't always look at it that way. And that's what really flipped in my mind as I started thinking about it, that we have lots and lots of lakes that are thousands of acres that are not easily accessible to the general public, even though they're owned by the general public. And so we need to ensure that we're giving folks access to these blue parks. The way I look at water access sites is probably a little unique, but I look at all of our great ponds this way.
I was eager to see an example of one of Diano's projects, and luckily he was kind enough to take me on a tour of the newly renovated site at Togus Pond in Augusta.
We're standing here on the shore at Togus Pond. This has been a traditional destination for people for decades. We have folks that work in our office that remember coming down here 30 and 40 years ago with their grandparents and learning how to fish off the causeway with their back to the highway.
Standing on the shore of Togus Pond, listening to the birds singing and the waves splashing up against the rocky shoreline, I watched as a few people pulled in with their motorboats. Across the road, some folks were unloading kayaks for a quick paddle during their lunch break. I realized what a special place Diano had managed to build, and I understood his pride as he shared more about the project with me.
I provide people an opportunity to get to the water. We try to do it in ways that are appropriate for the setting. You know, not every one of our access sites looks like this with a paved ramp for a trailered boat. You know, some are hike-in sites and some are hand-carry sites, and some are just bank fishing opportunities that we happen to be able to provide. But yeah, my whole job is to provide the public the opportunity to experience Maine's waters.
Diano went on to point out some of the innovative and unique features of the project at Togus Pond.
This is the trailer launch section of the pond. Togus Pond is a slightly more developed pond than Lower Togus, which is where the causeway is. So the causeway divides Togus from Lower Togus. We have a trailered ramp here on Togus Pond, and then we have a hand carry next to the causeway that goes onto Togus, and then another hand carry that goes onto Lower Togus. And the really unique thing about this facility is that it's all ADA accessible. It was all built and designed from the ground up to be ADA accessible, and you can get from one end to the other if you have a mobility challenge. And then it's connected together with casting platforms on either side of the causeway. You have lots of recreational opportunities here for people of, hopefully, lowers the barriers for all kinds of people that can get through the whole facility. But where we're standing is the trailer ramp. And there's one vehicle out here. It's the middle of the day on a random Tuesday. And what you'll see is that we had a great contractor on this project. So you can see as you look at the water on the shoreline that he set these big flat stones in different locations for different water levels so people could scramble down and fish off those stones. So there's opportunities all around depending on where the water's at. So not only can you launch boats here, but you can go down and fish right in the water if you wanted to.
Although very primitive, this location has been an opportunity in some form for folks to access these ponds for decades, and it took many years to develop the well-designed and constructed access site that it is today, a plan that started long before Diano stepped into the picture.
My predecessor in the 90s bought the property that we're standing on right now originally, and wasn't ever developed because he kept trying to get additional property that is now the causeway area, because he knew that we needed a little more space to do what we wanted to do here. And so the department's been working on this project for almost 30 years, I think, at the end of the day, from initial acquisition to development. What you would have saw 2 years ago, if you came to this site, this was an undeveloped shoreline here. The causeway itself, there's a highway that runs over the top of the causeway. And you would have saw a bunch of dirt tracks from the highway down into the water where people were scrambling down to fish or try to put boats in the water. It was a pretty limited opportunity to put boats in the water. So there were a lot of people that could slide kayaks and stuff down the bank into the water. They'd park their cars up on the shoulder of the highway. There were a few brave folks that would push their small trailered boats off the side of the highway, down the cliff, launch their boat, and then drive back up into the middle of the highway as fast as they could and try to get out of traffic. And that highway is a state highway, so they're doing 45, 55 miles an hour down that highway. Jim Connolly, our bureau director, had been thinking about this for decades. He was the regional biologist for this area and knew about it and had a great experience and knew how people were using it. And one of the things he said to me when I first got hired was, it's time to build at Togus, and we want to do something that is ADA compliant, that is available for everybody. Let's lower the barriers to access as much as we can for people and do something unique and special. We're right here. We're only 10 minutes from downtown Augusta, the state capital. But if you go on Lower Togus, on the other side of the causeway, you will feel like you're in the North Woods for a good section of it. It's all wild on both sides. The department owns a wildlife management area on one side, and so that will forever feel like a wild experience on that side. So in 2016 we acquired the property, and then it took several years to get the engineering work done, to get all the permitting in place. It usually takes us 2 to 3 years to get the engineering and permitting in place and all the funding ready to go, and then another year to actually do the construction. Give yourself windows of time to get it done. This is a culmination of 35 years worth of department work to make this come to fruition. And now, it's getting more use than it ever has before, but it's safe. More kayakers. Look at all those kayakers. Yeah, so we put up these guardrail barriers. So all the activities on one side of the guardrail barrier, so you're completely separated from traffic. But you can look where the guardrail barrier is now. That was the old edge of the road. That's where people were casting from before, right there on the white line.
You have to really want that fish. Taking your life in your own hands standing there.
Yep.
But yeah, no, this is a lot safer. This
Yep.
is a good design.
And you'll see, right now the parking area for Lower Togus has 4 vehicles in it, and they all have kayaks of one type or another on them. And that area has always been really popular with kayakers, and it's actually really popular with folks hunting from kayaks in the fall as well. There's a lot of waterfowl down in there, so it's a really neat What's really neat about this area too is that you get two different experiences, right? You have sort of a traditional southern Maine pond with camps surrounding it on one side, and then you have what looks like a wild waterway on the other. So you get both experiences here.
Building and maintaining water access sites is a big job, and there are, of course, costs associated with acquiring property and constructing the sites. So how are these projects funded?
Well, we have lots of important partners. One of the most important is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So there's an excise tax on all fishing equipment and on a portion of the gas tax related to outboard motors that is provided from Fish and Wildlife Service to the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife to do all kinds of work, but one of the primary pieces is providing water access. So 15% of all the wildlife and sport fish restoration funds that come to the department are used for water access. I should say sport fish side of that equation. So federal funds come from those excise taxes. They're distributed to the states. We receive those funds and we put them into action in facilities like you're standing at here at Togus Pond. And then we have to match those funds. Usually 75% of the funds can be federal and 25% are state. And so we have to match those funds. And one of the ways we do that is with some dedicated funds. One comes from the sportsman's license plate. Those funds from the sportsman's license plate are used to match the federal funds to build facilities like this. We also receive some money from the state gas tax, a small portion that's attributable to outboard motors. And that comes through our friends at the Bureau of Parks and Lands through a partnership with them. And then we do, if we're acquiring property, we often work with partners that are conservation organizations. Sometimes we apply directly to the Land for Maine's Future program and use funds from them to match our federal funds to do the acquisition of new properties to build these facilities. So there's lots of partners. The Submerged Lands program is a partner on the construction side of the projects. There's a fee for using the submerged lands of the state, which we just talked about are owned by the people, and some of those fees go back into providing access.
I've really come to admire Diano's dedication and passion for his work. As I'm sure you can imagine, keeping an eye on 174 sites across the state is a really big job for one person. But Diano takes great pride in making sure they stay in the best condition possible. When we first arrived at the pond, he immediately noticed someone had added some of their own personal artwork to one of the rocks at the edge of the parking lot. Always prepared, he leapt out of the truck, hopped into the back, and grabbed a few cans of spray paint to cover it up and make it look natural again.
It ain't perfect, but it's better than what was there. 90% of the people who use our facilities are great people, and they always are trying to do the right thing. There are always going to be a few people who have some education that needs to happen.
There are some ways that we can all do our part to make sure these access sites remain in good condition to be enjoyed for many years to come.
These are pet peeves more than anything. Power loading boats at public boat launches. So power loading a boat is when, rather than backing your trailer up just a little bit more so you can float that boat up onto the trailer, you might mash the throttle to get it up on the trailer. Well, that mashing of the throttle produces a lot of cavitation, which makes big holes at the bottoms of the ramp. It blows out gravel from between the ramp. And I've even seen instances where it's picked up panels and flipped them over. And so that's one of the reasons we get early deterioration on some of our sites is the power loading. And I know that that's just a piece of education. Not everybody understands that. But sometimes just back that boat up another foot, that trailer up another foot, and you don't have to power load onto the ramp. So what we've ended up having to do, we've had so much damage over the years from that type of use that we've actually gone to a much heavier duty plank system in the last few years, totally re-engineered how we build these ramps. And it's more expensive and costly, but they're much more durable. Still doesn't mean you should power load on them, because even at the end of the ramp, there's always an end to the ramp. And all that does is create holes at the ends of the ramp, which sometimes, when the water gets low, then that's where somebody's trailer ends up going into the hole. And that's a problem. We try to fix the things that go wrong as quickly as we can. So that's another thing that people can do is when you see something that's wrong with the facility, let us know and we'll do our best to get to it.
Another thing to keep in mind, especially on those busy, high-use days.
Just be kind to one another. These places are important. they're busy because they're in demand because there's not enough of them, and so they get crowded, and we have to all work together to make sure we're being kind to one another, sharing these spaces and understanding that, and then pick up after yourself. Simple stuff.
Talking with Diano and learning more about the work that goes into creating water access sites, it's clear that he is really passionate about his role and understands how it contributes to creating a more inclusive and accessible society where individuals of all abilities can enjoy equal opportunities for recreation and enjoyment.
One of the great things about having this job is getting to see people utilize the things that you spent all your time trying to make happen. And this is one of the most rewarding spots we have for that. It's close to the office, so I can get down here and take a look. But you get to see people of all different types using the facility. I mean, we just walked down here from the other side and ran into two young men getting ready to go fishing. And, that's really rewarding. They just popped the back of the truck, grabbed their fishing rods, and walked over to the side and started casting the line. And that wouldn't have been very easy to do 2 years ago. I think this really represents what the department's trying to achieve with the water access program too. We really see this as, diversity, equity, and inclusion being built into the landscape and providing that opportunity for people. Anybody can use this facility. We tried to put it in a location that has a diverse community near it. So, state capital has a more diverse community. We see a diverse community using it. I've seen folks of all different types out here using the facility. For example, I was out here a couple months ago and there were folks here with some developmental challenges that were learning how to fish. And I started talking to their caregivers, and the caregivers were telling us that they come out here once a week or once every 2 weeks because this is one of the few places where they can get folks out. It's safe, there's fresh air, and they can learn a new activity. It keeps them busy, gives them an opportunity to do something different. And that's really rewarding.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode and learning more about Maine's water access sites. We hope you have an opportunity to visit and enjoy one, or many, sometime very soon. If you need help locating a site, head over to mefishwildlife.com/boat. If you would like to learn more about this podcast series or to listen to past episodes, then visit mefishwildlife.com/changers. Be sure to tune in next week as I chat with another member of the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife team and explore what it is that makes them a game changer. In the meantime, be sure to hit subscribe on your favorite listening app, and if you have a moment, leave us a review and let us know what you think.